When you think about the best superhero rogues galleries, the same few heroes always get mentioned: Spider-Man, Batman, Superman, the Flash, and honestly probably the Fantastic Four. I've made videos going over the villain Mount Rushmore for heroes like Superman, Spider-Man, and Batman, and then to round out this series one last time, I want to look at the character who I believe has the top 3 best rogues gallery and find out who his top 4 Mount Rushmore supervillains are. That being right behind Spider-Man and Batman, we're going with the Scarlet Speedster himself, the Flash. If you haven't watched any of my other villain Mount Rushmore videos, I highly encourage you to, but really quick, I'll catch you up to speed in case you haven't on what I normally do to determine who deserves a spot on this list. I go through 3 different tiers, that being who is the oldest comic book villains that our heroes facing. The second one is looking at the best-selling comic books for this specific hero that we're going over, and what the big bad for each issue of those comic books were. And then lastly, to round this out, I look at the live-action appearances of each villain. After going through all of these lists, I honestly have a pretty good idea of who the fan-favorite villains are, but also the more impactful villains for each hero. But really quickly before we hop into it, if you enjoy this type of content and would like to see any other form of content from me, please drop a comment down below and let me know your thoughts on this video and the other type of videos you'd like to see from me in the future. If you like this type of content, please consider subscribing. It just lets me know that you guys like the videos I make, and I'll keep making more because of it. But let's just jump into the first list, that being our oldest comic book villains that the Flash has ever faced. To be honest, these villains were kind of difficult to pinpoint because the Flash has been multiple different people, starting with Jay Garrick and then Barry Allen to Wally West and a few others, but these are the main 3 that everyone talks about. So instead of going through all the villains that the first 3 fought, I figured I'd just briefly touch upon the first 2 Flashes and the first 5 villains that each of them fought, that being Jay Garrick and Barry Allen, since those were the first 2 Flashes. Starting with Jay Garrick's villains, the very first villain he ever fought was in Flash Comics number 1 in 1940, that being a guy named the Turtle, where he just uses slowness as his gimmick to fight the fastest man alive. Really stupid. Then we see in Flash comic number 2 the Lightning Master, who's a villain who harnessed electricity for his crimes. Nothing too crazy. Then in Flash comics 3 and 4 we see the King, who is just a criminal who is a mastermind in elaborate schemes, kind of just a trickster. And then we flash forward really briefly for the very last villain in Jay Garrick's list, that being Ragdoll in Flash comics 36 and 1942, a contortionist who's disguised himself as a doll. Other notable villains for Jay Garrick is the Thinker, Clifford Defoe, who we'll see later on in this list as well. Jumping on over to Barry Allen's Rogues Gallery, the first guy he ever fought back in Showcase issue number 4 in 1956 was the Turtle Man, the same guy that Jay Garrick fought. It's kind of funny. And then the second one in Showcase number 8 is a fan favorite, Captain Cold, a thief armed with a cold gun, and then he eventually became one of Flash's most iconic rogues villains, so keep that guy in mind. Then we see another fan favorite, that being Weather Wizard in Flash number 110, 1959. This guy kind of just had a wand who controlled the weather. Kind of funny. Mirror Master is the next guy on this list, a super iconic Flash villain, honestly one of the most iconic Flash villains. We see him first pop up in the Flash 105, 1949. This guy just used mirrors and illusions to be able to teleport between like different dimensions and through the mirrors to, just trick Barry Allen's Flash. Really interesting. And then lastly, number 5 was Gorilla Grodd, Flash 106, 1959. This guy has a lot of lore to him, which I'll touch upon later in this list, but he's just a hyper-intelligent telepathic gorilla. Really interesting. And then a few other honorable mentions for this list, with that being like the Trickster, Captain Boomerang, Pied Piper, Heatwave, and Mr. Element, who was later turned to Dr. Alchemy, which we will also touch upon him later on in this list. So to round out this first tier, we saw reappearing villains like the Turtle and the Thinker, Clifford Defoe. Nothing too iconic when you see Jay Garrick's early Flash villains, but as you go into Barry Allen, you see people like Captain Cold, Weather Wizard, Gorilla Grodd, Mirror Master, these Flash villains that if you're a fan of the character, have stuck around for a long time. So let's just jump into tier number 2, that being the best-selling comic books of the Flash and the main villain of each issue. Starting off this list, if you're a fan of the character, you know which one I'm saying first. Of course, that is Flashpoint from 2011. Not going to touch upon the story that much, but the main villain is the Reverse Flash, who sees Barry waking up in an alternate timeline where the world is on the brink of destruction, all this sort of stuff. The Reverse Flash is actually the guy behind all the chaos and stuff. Moving on, number 2 on this list, we have the Flash Rebirth from 2009. Again, Ed Barton Thawne, the Reverse Flash, is the main villain of this. This is another Jeff Johns run where the book explores Barry Allen returning to life after being presumed dead. Really iconic Flash storyline. But again, it's just the Reverse Flash. So moving on, I didn't know whether to count this as a Flash story, but I couldn't not include it because he plays a huge heroic role in this story, that being Crisis on Infinite Earths in 1985 and 86. The main villain of that isn't the Reverse Flash, surprisingly. It's actually the Anti-Monitor, but this is like their in-game, their secret wars for the DC comics at the time, and Barry Allen was so heroic in this role, sacrificing himself, he had to be included in this story. So moving on to number 4, we see The Flash, The Return of with Barry Allen in 1993. The main villain for this, surprise again, is Eobard Thawne, the Reverse Flash. He's a fan favorite in these stories, but honestly, it's getting repetitive here. In this story, the fan favorite Barry Allen returns and reveals that actually it's the Reverse Flash that was impersonating him. This story really just explores themes of legacy, heroism, and then shows Wally West's growth as the Flash. Rounding out number 5 on this list was The Flash Born to Run in 1992, the main villain being someone different on this. If you're a fan of the TV show, you know who Savitar is. This comic serves as the retelling of Wally West's origin story, detailing how he gained his powers and became Kid Flash. While Savitar is not really a focused villain on this, he is the main villain and plays a significant role in a cult-like speedster obsession with the Speed Force. Honorable mentions in this list include The Flash Blitz from 2003, the main villain being Hunter Zolomon, aka Zoom. The Flash Rogues War 2005, the Rogues were just the main villains, so like people like Captain Cold, Heatwave, Weather Wizard, and more iconic Flash villains. And then lastly, a super iconic Flash story, The Trial of the Flash. Surprise again, Eobard Thawne's Reverse Flash was the main villain in this one. So let's just move on to the main movie and TV show villains, because there's only one Flash movie, so we have to include both TV shows. Very briefly, touching upon the 2023 Flash movie, we have the Dark Flash, Evil Barry, as the main villain for this. This is an original character, to my knowledge, from Earth 89, according to Google, who is a future variant of Barry Allen from the past, and he was just really trying to start this loop. The origin as the Flash, there's not that much origin story with this guy because he's the first villain to ever appear. In the past with series, I've really just stopped at the live action ones, but again, like I said, I'm gonna have to go into the TV shows, because if we ended the list with the Dark Flash, we would not really have a list here. So let's move on to the TV show villains. Really briefly, if you're unfamiliar with The Flash in television, there's actually 2 Flash TV shows. One ran from 1990 to 1991 with just 1 season. This was John Wesley Shipp as Barry Allen's Flash, and then there's the one with Grant Gustin that we all know and love, kind of. But touching with the 1990 series, the main overall villain was a guy named Nicholas Pike, and he was just a corrupt police officer that turned gang leader and served as the primary antagonist in the pilot episode and throughout the rest of the series. He became Barry Allen's first villain on the TV show after Barry gained superpowers. Pike's he was just had a vendetta against Barry, nothing really too crazy, but in addition to him, more of the iconic villains from that TV show I couldn't not mention, being the Trickster, and Mark Hamill's portrayal of him is just extremely iconic, as well as Captain Cold. So really, the big takeaway from this TV show was Mark Hamill's Trickster, and he actually shows back up in Grant Gustin's Flash TV series, so it's cool that he's on this list as well, and then Captain Cold as well. So those 3 are really the only ones to take away from the 90s Flash TV show. Really quickly, not going to go into a whole lot of depth, because if you're fans of the character, you know kind of what's going on with this series. It's a hit or miss depending on which season you watch, but for season 1, the Reverse Flash is the main villain. Season 2, Hunter Zolomon Zoom, and then season 3 we have Savitar, who is the self-proclaimed god of speed. And spoiler for this decade-long show, it was actually Barry Allen who was Savitar in this story. But if you guys ever want to see me go through seasons 1 through 3 of this show, I mean, I think those 3 seasons are peak, and I'm extremely tempted to make a video looking back on those 3 seasons, just those 3 seasons. So if you're interested in that, let me know down in the comments. But moving on to season 4, in my opinion, this is when the show started to decline in quality, but that's rather here nor there. You have the Thinker, Clifford DeVoe, as the main villain, and then in season 5, you have Cicada, a metahuman who's targeting other people with metahuman powers, who's wielding a dagger. This season was just awful, but I'm getting sidetracked. Then season 6, we have Bloodwork, Dr. Ramsey, who is a scientist turned evil and seeks to spread his immortality through a blood disease. It's kind of weird. And then we also see Mirror Monarch is the second half of the season villain, who is a woman trapped in the Mirrorverse, who becomes a master manipulator and a formidable foe for Barry Allen's Flash. In season 7, Mirror Monarch shows back up, and then we also have the Forces, that being people like Sage, Strength, Still, and the Speed Forces, as well as Godspeed, who finally showed up in the series. Season 8, we see Despero, is I believe how you say it. The Reverse Flash shows back up, and we see Deathstorm, who is kind of like Deathstroke and the Flash. Really interesting. We also see Red Death and Cobalt Blue in the season finales in season 9, that being Malcolm Thawne, who full circle moment, bringing him back from season 1. But that's all the villains that we have on this list from the Flash TV show. So let's just count all these up and see who actually deserves a spot on this list. Finding who deserved a spot on this list was really difficult for me because obviously the Reverse Flash, E. Barton Thawne, needs no introduction. He's the first spot on this list. But for the other three, there was a lot of people I could have put on this list, like Mirror Master and Heatwave, all these other extremely iconic Flash villains. But I've got to give it to Zoom Hunter Zolomon. He is just an amazing villain after suffering the tragedy and just trying to get super speed synthetically. I think that is so cool. Like, using synthetic speed is such an interesting thing to make the villain have to go up against the Flash. He doesn't gain his powers through the Speed Force. He manipulates time and tries to create the illusion of super speed. I just think that is so cool. I mean, again, he's another speedster villain, but the other two on this list are not. So, and also this is my list. But I think Captain Cold and Gorilla Grodd are the last two who deserve a spot on this list. Being the leader of the Rogues Gallery and Captain Cold being an extremely iconic leader, I think was a no-brainer putting him on this list. Him having a strict moral code where he refuses to kill unless necessary, his leadership making him a complex villain. He's a fan favorite. I'm not that well versed in a lot of Flash lore, but I know Captain Cold is like, he is that guy. Plus, he looks so cool, no pun intended, but he's a guy with a cold gun who tries to stop the fastest man alive with a gun. That's awesome. And then speaking of awesome, we have a giant gorilla, Gorilla Grodd, who is this hyper-intelligent telepathic gorilla from Gorilla City. Dude, that's so cool. I didn't really touch upon him earlier in this video, but Grodd, he stands out, in my opinion, as an iconic Flash villain. He just seeks to dominate humanity. His unique nature and ambition makes him a standout villain compared to the rest of them, because most Flash villains either have some sort of gimmick like Mirror Master or Captain Cold, or they're just straight-up speedsters. This guy is a telepathic giant gorilla. That is so cool. He uses his intelligence to make him one of the greatest minds in the DC universe, and his telepath powers make him able to control minds and manipulate others, and even rival the Flash with his psychic powers. What's faster, the super intelligent mind or the fastest man alive? And also, he's a telepathic gorilla. That is huge. That's awesome, dude.
Barack Obama.
Like I said at the beginning of this video, The Flash has such a large list of Rogues Gallery members. I mean, heck, one of his biggest teams, kind of like how Spider-Man has the Sinister Six, is called the Rogues because he has so many rogues. So honorable mentions for this list, we've got people like the Trickster, Godspeed, the Thinker, Mirror Master, Weather Wizard, Heatwave, Savitar, Cobalt Blue, Abracadabra, and Dr. Alchemy, just barely touching the surface of Flash villains. I think he's got the third best Rogues Gallery in comics, so I know this video was a little bit of a shorter one, but it was kind of hard for me to come up with this list, but just in my opinion, the biggest standouts have to be Grodd, Captain Cold, and the two most iconic speedster villains for the Flash, Zoom, and of course, the Reverse Flash. But admittedly, I am not the Flash master. I do not know everything about the character. So if you thought I was off in left field on this, ridicule me in the comments. Let me know who I should have put on here. Or if you thought I got this right and I hit it right on the head, let me know, because I thought I did pretty well on this. But if I didn't, you know what? Sue me, I guess. I thought this was great. I had a lot of fun making this video, and ultimately, that's what matters to me. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video, because I enjoy making these videos, and it seems like you guys enjoy watching this video. So let me know your guys' comments down below, and I will see you guys in the next one. Take care. Bye.